My name is Raul Vicente. I'm a professor of data science at the University of Tartu, and today I would like to introduce you to my proposal for this professorship in AI that revolves around grid cells in both artificial intelligence and the brain. So what are these grid cells? Maybe some of you know them, but just in case, I would like to remind that grid cells are a very special type of neurons that sit in a region of the brain called the entorhinal cortex. It's this region here marked in green. So very deep inside your brain. And they are critical for both spatial navigations. This is moving, locating yourself around a physical space, and also for several memory systems of the brain. What is really striking about these neurons is that they activate in a periodic hexagonal pattern that tiles the environment. This means that they activate, for example, each of these neurons activates whenever you are in a given location of an environment. For example, in this map of a city, they will activate each of these cells whenever you are, for example, in this vertex of this hexagonal pattern, or when you are in this vertex, or when you are in this other vertex, basically only on the vertices of an hexagonal pattern that tiles the full environment. And because the same cell will activate whenever you are in a given location or in a certain distance from that location and at a certain orientation, they are thought that these grid cells provide a sense of metric for space. This is an intuitive sense for distance and orientation in an environment. So they are thought to endow the animals and the humans with this physical intuition of sense of a space. They provide the metric for us to move around in physical space. The pattern is so striking that actually only 9 years after their discovery, they were discovered in 2005, and in 2014, the Nobel Prize, half of the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine were given to Maybrit Moser and Edward Moser for their discovery of these grid cells and their striking hexagonal pattern. But since then, since the Nobel Prize, the research has only gone becoming more interesting, if possible, because these grid cells periodic pattern, this hexagonal pattern in which they activate, are thought also to form cognitive maps in physical space, because they allow, in some sense, this notion of distance and orientation that they endow us, allow us also to think how two things are related, how two objects are related to each other, not only how they are related to us. And that's almost the definition of a map or a cognitive map, to understanding of how different things are related to each other, independent of how they are related to us, so providing some sort of map. And in a sense, they are also thought to be critical for any aspect of mental navigation. Let's say when you want to go from point A to point B, but not in physical space, not in the usual location space, but rather in any other, even more abstract spaces, they are also thought to be engaged in this type of mental navigation. For example, think that point A could be the mental state of a colleague or a friend, and we want to talk to him or her in order to induce him to be in another state, in a point B. So this conversation or these aspects that we talk to another person to bring it from point A to point B is also certain mental navigation, certain planning that we do. And the grid cells are also thought to be involved in this more navigation in more abstract spaces. And also, they are thought to be important for the basis of analogy reasoning, identifying which characteristics or dimensions relate A to B, as, for example, another object C is to D. So basically, they are thought to be important for any aspect of navigation, not only in physical space, but rather in more abstract spaces. And that is also very much into the core of how we think and how we plan. What is striking also is that these grid cells are found not only in the object of the left, which is a brain, but also on foundational models of AI, such as even transformer networks, which is basically the state of the art for most of the generative artificial intelligence that you see nowadays, including GPT or generative pre-trained networks. So transformers. So basically, they have also observed that some layers of these artificial neural networks that are very important for many of the generative AI, in some tasks, they also produce this striking pattern of grid cells. The fact that they activate whenever the agent is situated in the vertices of a hexagonal pattern that tiles the environment. So this brings, of course, two very important questions. Why such hexagonal patterns appear in both natural and artificial networks, and how they are formed? So why to study grid cells in AI? Basically, first of all, because they are there. There are certain networks in artificial intelligence that form grid cells, and we don't understand why. And second, because artificial neural networks are an ideal system to be open up and to research how grid cells are formed, because there in an artificial network, we have all the neurons, we have the information about all the connections. Basically, we have all the information a neuroscientist could ever dream, but in an artificial network. So there, it could be easier to investigate how these hexagonal patterns form and how they change from environment to environment. And second, a more fundamental question, why hexagons? Why these neurons activate on the vertices of hexagons and not any other geometric figure? This is a puzzle still in the field. The research hypothesis here is that the grid cells are akin to a Fourier basis for 2D environments. So if you're familiar with Fourier analysis, basically what it means is to decompose a signal into a superposition of sinusoid waves of different frequency, like the little waves that I show here. So a bank of these functions, which basically are sinusoids of different frequency. With this, you can decompose basically any time series, and it's very important for a lot of aspects of signal processing. And the idea is that these hexagons of different periodicity are the equivalent to these sinusoids whenever an animal needs to navigate in a 2D environment. So our research hypothesis is that these grid cells are a basis for an animal to navigate and to locate and to understand how objects are in relation to each other. Basically, the formation of maps that we can use to navigate. And that's, we believe, has to do with the reason why they are formed, because they form this very useful basis to navigate and to in a space. And how they are formed, the idea is that in a hexagonal lattice basically has a double periodicity in two independent directions. Therefore, basically the same cell will activate whenever the animal moves in certain direction and also in another independent direction. So this lattice with this double periodicity actually should correspond to the activity of the grid cells to live on the surface of a torus. And very recently, just 2022, the Mosers, the Nobel Prize winners for the discovery of grid cells, they show experimentally that collecting in an heroic effort, collecting many, many grid cells, this also saw how this pattern of activity of this collection of grid cells also move around the surface of a torus. So the torus, the identification of a torus, would be the signature of the birth of a grid cell. So our proposal, our methods that we want to apply to tackle this problem of why grid cells form these hexagons and how they are formed is to transform an artificial neural network into a dynamical system. Basically, the idea is that the discrete layers that a neural network process information to be transformed into a continuous time, into a smooth continuous parameter, therefore converting this artificial neural network into a dynamical system. And there we have already some work in which we have mapped transformer, this state-of-the-art networks and other architectures, into these dynamical systems, in which it's easier to study the birth of new trajectories, especially those forming tori manifolds, which is, as I said, the signature of this birth of these grid cells. So there we have everything ready. We have converted some of the most popular artificial neural networks into these dynamical systems, which by being smooth, allow us to study the emergence of new surfaces and the change of stability of solutions, which basically will allow us to bifurcation studies to understand in an analytical way the formation of grid cells by their signature of creating their activity along the surface of a torus, which basically identifies the double periodicity of these hexagonal patterns. So the international team we count to tackle this problem is a very selected one. It's Professor Kairit Tammets from UCL, with whom we have also published some article on the use of grid cells to decode the spatial location of an animal. And also Professor Christian Doller, which is Max Planck Institute director and is the discoverer of grid cells in humans. So basically we count with the support and the collaboration of two of the, I would say, world leaders in research of grid cells. And the significance of this research project for Estonia would be that we can put Estonia in the map of grid cell research with the collaboration of both Caswell-Barry and Christian Doller. Both have been, by the way, informed about this project. And also we count with the permission by the Christian Doller also for the exchange of students to conduct the experimental part of these studies. So what is the action plan to go from the theory to the empirical validation? First, to simulate and analyze the dynamical system of stemming from many or different artificial neural networks, in which we will track the formation of these torus, these trajectories living on the surface of a torus, which is again the signature of the birth of grid cells. We will also refine the methodology to characterize grid cells, to study the characteristics of these hexagonal patterns. And finally, we will study agents moving in different environments with different shape. You can think of, again, different rooms shaped in different way or different environments, agents doing different tasks. And the analytical studies and the simulation studies, the predictions about the grid cell patterns, about these hexagonal patterns that we will take from these studies, will be also validated in experiments with humans, in virtual reality experiments, in which we can form rooms of any shape, and we can investigate how these hexagonal patterns influence the spatial navigation and the memory in humans in these environments. So the action is to go from simulation and analysis to finally empirical validation of the results in virtual reality experiments. So the timetable is very easy. In our case, it's just 1 year project. So the idea is to first refine the training and simulation of artificial networks and the conversion into dynamical systems, which will allow us to identify this toroid surface, which is the signature of these grid cells. Second, proceed with a phase of data analysis and grid cells identification, in which we will refine the algorithms to detect these grid cells and the properties of these hexagonal patterns. Finally, we will refine methods and select the most striking predictions for empirical tests, and finally conduct the VR experiments. I have to say also that actually each of these 4 components, there is already some work being started. So we don't start from zero. Rather, we had some experience in each of these 4 phases. And the team will be formed by, the specific team for this project will be formed by myself. Well, I'm a professor of data science, and I have been working the last 20 years in different aspects of neuroscience and AI. In my formation, I studied in the Institute of Complex Systems in Spain, in which I basically was training these dynamical systems aspects of pattern formations. Then I spent 7 years as a postdoc in Germany, in an institute for Max Planck Institute for Brain Research, where I got familiar with the neuroscience. Finally, since the last 11 years, I've been working in deep learning and AI here in Tartu University. So I believe I can have experience to lead such an interdisciplinary project. And the other members of the team for this project would be Meelis Kull, who is a postdoc, who is expert in virtual reality, and Pepe Maldonado, who is a physicist, an expert in analysis and stability analysis of different dynamical system models, and Jesus Reyes, which is a PhD student, which is currently training different AI models for this project. So in summary, what I would like to say is that the latest AI models offer an opportunity to understand how and why hexagonal patterns of grid cells emerge from the learning and experience of an agent in an environment. And now we have an unprecedented precision to open these models and understand why these cells are formed also in this artificial intelligence network and what they are good for. And this would solve or at least help to advance one of the most fundamental questions in this field, which again, it was recognized a few years ago with the Nobel Prize, and since then it has only become even more interesting. I believe we have the background and the right interdisciplinary mix of physicists, psychologists, and computer scientists to tackle this problem, together with, this is a very important aspect, with 2 world leaders in the field of grid cells research, with Caswell Barry and Christian Doller, which, by the way, both are related to the labs of the 3 Nobel Prize winners for the grid cells discovery. Finally, I would like to simply note again that this is fundamental science. It's not applied science, so we cannot promise bigger or better robots or curing diseases, even though some people relate grid cells to better spatial navigations also in artificial agents, and also is one way how these grid cells are affected, is one way also to monitor the progress of Alzheimer's disease. But we are not promising anything in that direction. What we can promise is the formation of a generation of postdocs and PhD in the field of grid cell research, which is a field that can impact the understanding of spatial intelligence. And final point I would like to mention is that if you think about it in language, spatial terms that have to do with how we move across a space and how things are located with respect to each other in a space, it clearly percolates all other aspects of our intelligence, including how we talk about, for example, we mentioned a long day, or this is a short meeting, or we look forward to the future, or one feels depressed, or on top of the world, or this is an in-depth analysis, or a broad overview, or narrow focus, or something is overpriced. As you can see, our language and our reasoning in many other domains borrows terms from spatial intelligence. So maybe spatial intelligence is one of the core for other types of intelligence, and I'm very excited to try to work out this problem. And I think that's all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention.